Well now, friends, find that comfortable spot and let the world outside just fade away. As the quiet of the evening deepens around you, I want you to think for a moment about the feeling of stillness, the simple, peaceful feeling of your body at rest, your feet still, your hands calm. It's a feeling we take for granted. But tonight's story is about a time in a city not so different from our own when that simple peace was stolen away, replaced by a movement that no one could explain and no one could stop. As always, if you enjoy our time together here, a simple like is a lovely way to let us know. And if you subscribe, you'll never miss a journey into the past. I truly do love reading your comments and seeing where you're all listening from. It's a small thing, but it makes this vast world feel like a cozy, fire-lit room. All right now, let your head sink into the pillow. Let go of the day. Let's just wander back a little ways, back across the centuries. The year is 1518. The month is July, and the sun is rising over the free and prosperous city of Strasbourg. The air is still cool and sweet with the promise of a warm summer day. The city, nestled on the banks of the river Rhine, begins to stir. The first sound is a deep, resonant one, the tolling of the great bell from the single, magnificent spire of the cathedral, calling the faithful to morning prayer. Its voice rolls over the steep-gabled, half-timbered houses that lean against each other like old friends. Down in the narrow cobblestone streets, still damp with morning dew, the city awakens. A baker, his face already dusted with flour, slides the first batch of bread into his hot stone oven, and a warm, comforting smell begins to drift through the alleys. A blacksmith's hammer begins its rhythmic metallic song. Wooden shutters are thrown open with a clatter, and the low murmur of voices begins to build as merchants set up their stalls in the market square. It is a world of order, a world of routine. Everyone knows their place, everyone knows their purpose. The life of the city moves with a rhythm as steady and predictable as the flow of the great river beside it. It is a morning like any other morning for the last 100 years, solid, predictable, safe. There is no sign of the strangeness to come. There is no hint of the fever that is about to grip this city, a fever that will not be of the body, but of the feet. A fever that will demand a dance, and it will all begin on a street just like this one with a single person, a woman whose name we will soon learn is about to step out of her doorway. She is not a queen, nor a witch, nor a saint. She is an ordinary woman about to do something utterly extraordinary. She will step into the warm July sunlight, and without a word, without a sound from her own lips, she will begin to dance. Her name, the old records tell us, was Trophea, though on this particular morning she was known simply as a neighbor, a wife, a citizen of Strasbourg. There was nothing, at first, to distinguish her from any other woman walking through the busy summer streets. She carried a simple woven basket, its handle smooth from years of use. Her steps on the cobblestones were steady and purposeful. Perhaps she was on her way to the market, her mind occupied with the price of flour or the quality of the fish brought up from the river. Or perhaps she was returning home with bread and cheese for the midday meal. Her thoughts, we can imagine, were ordinary thoughts. The quiet, constant hum of a life in 1518, a worry about the heat of the day and whether the milk would sour. A mental note to mend a tear in her husband's tunic. A passing prayer of thanks that her family had been spared from the fevers that had swept through the city the previous winter. She nodded to a neighbor, a blacksmith's wife, who was sweeping her doorstep. She stepped aside to let a noisy cart pulled by a tired-looking horse, rattle past. She was a thread in the great complex tapestry of the city, anonymous, normal. There was no sign of religious fervor in her eyes, no hint of madness, no indication of illness. She was simply Frau Trophäa, a woman in her prime walking down a familiar street on a familiar summer day, her mind filled with the small, familiar worries and tasks that make up a life. And that is what makes what happened next so profoundly strange. Because a story like this, you expect it to begin with a prophecy, or a crime, or a great event. But this one didn't. It began in the most ordinary way possible, with an ordinary woman who, for a reason the world will never know, simply stopped walking. She stops, right there in the middle of the street. A cart loaded with wine barrels rattles past her. Two merchants haggle loudly over a bolt of cloth nearby. The sounds of the city swirl around her. But for Frau Trophäa, there is only a sudden, profound stillness. Her neighbors passing by might have thought she had simply dropped something or had forgotten an item on her list. But then, a twitch. It starts in her feet. A single, shuffling, sideways step. Awkward, out of place. Then, another. Her arms, which had been resting at her sides, jerk upwards as if pulled by invisible strings. Her body begins to twist, to turn, to jump. There is no music, no fiddler, no drummer, no piper. The only sound is the frantic, uneven slap of her worn leather shoes against the hard cobblestones. Slap, slap, slap. Turn. Slap. It is a dance with no rhythm, a performance for no one. A few onlookers chuckle. Is the woman drunk so early in the day? Is she playing some kind of fool's game? But as the moments stretch into minutes, the laughter dies in their throats. They see the look on her face. It is not one of joy, it is a blank mask, her eyes staring at nothing, while her body continues its strange, convulsive ballet. The sun climbs higher in the sky, the shadows shorten, and Frau Trophäa, she just keeps dancing. Let's try for a moment to step inside her shoes, to feel what Frau Trophäa might have been feeling. Her mind is a calm lake, but her body is a storm. Stop. The word is a silent scream inside my skull. Please, just stop. But my legs do not listen. They are strangers to me now, traitors to my own will. They twist and kick and jump, pulling me along in a dance I do not know, to a song I cannot hear. My lungs burn. A sharp pain stabs at my side with every frantic turn. My neighbors. I see their faces in a blur. First they smiled. Now they do not. They whisper behind their hands. Their eyes are wide with a mixture of pity and fear. The shame is a hot coal in my stomach. I want to sink into the ground, but my feet will not let me. They keep moving. Slap, jump, turn, slap. The sun is a hot eye in the sky, beating down on my head. Sweat stings my eyes. My throat is a desert. I see my husband push through the crowd. His face is a mask of worry. He calls my name. I try to answer, but only a gasp comes out. He grabs my arms, tries to hold me still. I want to fall against him. I want this to be over. But my body lurches away from him, my arms flailing, my legs kicking. It is not me. This is not me. This is a puppet, and some cruel invisible hand is pulling the strings. The sun begins to set, painting the sky in colors of blood and bruises. The streets empty. The doors are barred. The city goes to sleep, but I do not. I dance alone now, in the cool moonlight. My shadow is a long, frantic spectre, leaping and twisting beside me on the cobblestones. The pain in my feet is a dull, constant fire. Every muscle screams. All I want in this world is to lie down, to feel the cool, solid stillness of the earth beneath me. But I cannot. The dance will not let me, and I do not know if it ever will. As the second day dawns, Frau Trophäa is no longer just a private tragedy. She is a public spectacle. The story of the woman who danced all night has spread through the city like a fever. The small, curious crowd from yesterday has now grown. Shopkeepers leave their stalls, apprentices abandon their work, and children sneak away from their chores, all drawn to the street where the strange dance continues. The process of their reaction unfolds in slow, predictable stages. First, there is still a kind of morbid amusement. Newcomers to the scene who have only heard the rumors arrive expecting a prank or the ramblings of a drunkard. They point and whisper, some with a nervous laugh. But the laughter doesn't last. Then comes a wave of pity. They see her condition, now in the harsh light of a new day. Her dress is soiled and torn. Her face is pale and streaked with dirt and sweat. Her hair, once neatly pinned, now hangs in damp, matted clumps. And her feet are a swollen, bruised mess inside her ruined shoes. They see her stumble, her body crying out for rest, only to be jerked back into motion by that same invisible force. This is not a choice, this is torment. And finally, as pity gives way to a deeper unease, comes the fear. This is not natural. This is not a simple madness. In a world where the supernatural felt as real as the cobblestones under their feet, the people of Strasbourg began to search for a reason, for a name to put to their fear. The whispers change. It is a curse, one says. She must have offended God. Another mutters, it is the work of a demon. A third, remembering old tales, whispers the name of a fearsome saint, a saint who could punish sinners with a plague of endless dancing. The crowd forms a wide, silent circle around her. They are a wall of eyes, watching, waiting. No one dares to get too close now. Her private agony has become a public omen, a dark mirror reflecting their own deepest fears of divine wrath and unseen forces. They do not know what they are watching, but they feel with a cold certainty that it is important, and that it is not yet over. The sun, that great golden clock in the sky, continues its indifferent journey. It sinks towards the horizon, and the shadows of the half-timbered houses stretch long and black across the cobblestones, like dark fingers reaching for Frau Trophäa. The crowd begins to disperse. The spectacle is over for the day. Doors are closed and barred. The smell of evening meals, of wood smoke and stew drifts from the windows. The city prepares for the peace and oblivion of night. They leave her to her strange fate, a lone figure. In the growing twilight, night falls completely. The moon, a thin silver sliver, rises over the cathedral spire. The streets are empty now. A profound silence settles over Strasbourg, broken only by the distant bark of a dog, and the unending, shuffling rhythm of Frau Trophäa's feet. She dances with her own long shadow under the cold gaze of the stars. There is no one to watch her now but the stone saints carved on the church facade. Her movements are slower, more ragged. She is a puppet whose strings are tangled, whose energy is nearly spent. Each step is an agony, each turn a monumental effort of a will that is not her own. She is trapped in a nightmare from which she cannot wake. The hours of the night creep by, each one an eternity. Midnight comes and goes, the deepest, darkest part of the night when the world seems to hold its breath. And still she dances. Then a faint grey light begins to touch the eastern sky. The stars fade. The deep toll of the cathedral bell rings out once more, signaling the start of a new day. Shutters begin to open. The baker returns to his oven, and the first citizens to step out into the street, they stop and they stare. She is still there, after a day and a night and another dawn, after enduring heat and cold and exhaustion that would fell the strongest man. She is still dancing. The absurdity of it, the sheer impossibility of it, settles over the town like a shroud. This is no longer a strange event. This is a horror, and it is not over. When we are faced with a suffering we cannot comprehend, our first instinct is often to act, to do something, anything, to impose a sense of order on the chaos. And so it was for the husband of Frau Trophäa. After 2 days and 2 nights of watching, his wife tormented by this invisible force, his desperation finally boiled over. He could not simply stand by and watch her dance herself to death. He pushed through the silent, watching crowd once more. This time, there was no gentle pleading. He meant to end this. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip strong, trying to anchor her to the spot. He tried to pin her arms, to still her flailing limbs. A few other men from the neighborhood, seeing his intent, moved to help, trying to form a human barrier around her. It was useless. It was like trying to hold back the wind. Her body, though gaunt and pale with exhaustion, seemed possessed by a strength that was not her own. She twisted out of their grasp with a convulsive energy. Her feet, a bloody and swollen mess, never stopped their frantic rhythm. She did not seem to see them, her eyes fixed on some distant inner horror. They fell back, breathless and defeated. And in that moment, a new, more profound fear settled upon them. This was not a sickness they could fight with strength. This was not a madness they could soothe with reason. It was something else entirely. They were trying to wrestle with a ghost. Looking back from our modern world, it is easy to see their struggle for what it was. The attempt to solve a problem of the mind with the tools of the body. The storm was not in the street. It was inside Frau Trophäa herself. And no amount of physical restraint could calm that inner tempest. But for her husband, for her neighbors, standing there in the summer sun of 1518, there was only one terrifying conclusion to be drawn. The force that made her dance was stronger than they were, stronger than any man. It was a power beyond their world, and if they could not stop it themselves, they would have to turn to those who claimed to understand such powers, the city's officials, its doctors, and its priests. The private tragedy of Frau Trophäa was about to become a matter of public policy. The news of the failed intervention, of a strength that was not human, became a new, more potent kind of fuel for the city's fear. The story was no longer just a strange anecdote. It was a plague of whispers, spreading faster than the woman's. Tired feet. You could hear it in the market square, where the loud bartering of merchants was replaced by hushed, urgent tones. Did you hear? Her husband and 3 strong men couldn't hold her still. You could hear it by the river, where the rhythmic slapping of wet laundry on the stones would pause as women leaned closer to share the tale. They say her eyes are black, like she sees nothing of this world. You could hear it in the taverns at night over mugs of dark, bitter ale. The usual boisterous laughter was gone, replaced by low muttering, by wild theories of witchcraft, of divine punishment, of a curse rising from the very stones of their city. The story mutated as it spread. Frau Trophäa was no longer just a woman. She was a sign, a portent, a terrifying mystery that now belonged to everyone. And these whispers, these little currents of fear, they flowed through the city's veins, up the social ladder, from the mouths of apprentices to the ears of guildmasters, until finally they reached the great halls where the city's leaders sat, and the quiet cloisters of the cathedral. The problem on that one small street could no longer be ignored. For days the city had watched one woman's private nightmare. They stood at a safe distance, separated from her torment by a wall of pity and fear. They believed her affliction was hers alone. They were wrong. It happened in the afternoon of the 4th or 5th day. The crowd was thick, their faces a sea of pale upturned masks. In that crowd was another woman. She had been watching Frau Trophäa for hours, her own mending forgotten in her lap. Her expression was one of deep, empathetic sorrow. And then she felt a twitch in her own foot. She probably ignored it at first, a simple muscle spasm. But then it came again. A tap, tap, tap. Her foot moving in time with the phantom rhythm of the dancer before her. She looked down at her own shoe, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. She tried to still it, but the foot would not obey. A tremor ran up her leg. Her shoulder jerked. And then, with a choked gasp, her entire body was seized. She stumbled forward out of the horrified crowd, her arms flailing, her head thrown back. She too had begun to dance. A wave of pure panic ripped through the onlookers. They scrambled backwards, pushing, tripping over each other to get away. The terrible truth had dawned on them. This was not a curse on a single soul, it was a contagion. It could leap from one person to another. It was a plague, and no one knew who would be next. Panic is its own kind of plague. The sight of that second woman falling into the dance did not just scare the people of Strasbourg. It seemed to break something in their collective mind. The fear, the morbid fascination they had all shared while watching Frau Trophäa, it had planted a seed. And now that seed began to sprout. Later that same day, a third person began to dance. The next morning it was 5. A baker's apprentice, a weaver, a young man who had only come to watch. One by one they would stop, a look of confusion on their faces, and then, as if seized by a fit, they too would join the frantic growing troop. The rhythm of their feet became a horrifying new drumbeat for the city. It was no longer a solo performance. It was a chaotic, writhing chorus line of misery. Within a single week, the city records, written in a hurried, worried hand, tell us the number had grown to 34 people. Stripped of their will, their bodies held hostage by an invisible affliction. They danced in the summer heat, their movements jerky and unsynchronized, their faces vacant. The city's normal life began to falter. The marketplace grew quieter. People hurried through the streets, avoiding the squares where the dancers had congregated. They looked at their neighbors with a new kind of suspicion, wondering whose mind would be the next to break. The phenomenon was no longer a curiosity. That could be watched from a safe distance. It was a crisis, a public emergency. The whispers of the taverns and the marketplaces had become a roar of fear and confusion that could no longer be contained. It was a roar that finally reached the ears of the city's most powerful men. The problem had grown too large for neighbors and husbands to solve. It was now a matter for the city itself. The problem has a name now, the dancing plague, and it has landed on the heavy oak table of the Strasbourg City Council. Let's imagine ourselves in that room. It is dark, the air thick with the smell of old wood, beeswax, and the faint scent of fear. The city's most powerful men are gathered here, the stern-faced guildmasters, the wealthy merchants, the city magistrate himself. They are men of logic, men of commerce, men of order. And they are utterly baffled. Let's listen to the thoughts of one of them, a man named Albrecht, as he stares out the leaded glass window at the street below. 34 of them. The report is clear. 34 citizens of this good, God-fearing city, twitching and flailing in the streets like puppets in a devil's carnival. It makes no sense. My mind searches for a reason, a rational cause. A sickness, a fever of the brain, perhaps a poison in the grain from the last harvest, or something foul in the water of the wells. It must be something of this earth, something we can understand and therefore control. But then I remember the face of the young weaver's boy I saw this morning. His eyes, they were like glass. There was no one home. And the way his body moved, it was not the movement of a sick man. It was something else, something unholy. The priests are whispering. They say it is God's wrath, a punishment for our city's pride, for the vanity of our women or the greed of our merchants. They speak of Saint Vitus and the curse he places upon the unholy. A part of me, the part that learned its catechism as a boy, shivers at the thought. The part of me that counts coin and writes laws, it scoffs. But what if the priests are right? What if this is not a matter for doctors, but for exorcists? The people are terrified. They look to us for answers. We must do something. We must restore order. To do nothing is to admit that we are powerless. And if we are powerless, and then who is truly in charge of this city? Is it us, or is it this strange dancing fever? Albrecht's thoughts are interrupted by the city's chief physician, a man of great learning who stands to speak. He clears his throat, and in a confident voice offers them the one thing they crave most, a scientific-sounding explanation, an answer that smells not of sin, but of reason. The physician, a man named Paracelsus according to some accounts, though the name is likely a later embellishment, stepped forward. He was a man of books and learning in an age of superstition, and he carried himself with an air of immense confidence. Dismissed the whispers of curses and divine wrath with a wave of his hand. This was not a matter for priests, he argued, but for men of science. It was a natural affliction, not a supernatural one. The cause, he declared to the council, his voice echoing in the quiet chamber, is simple. It is a malady of the blood. He went on to explain the prevailing medical theory of the time. The human body, he said, was governed by a delicate balance. The intense heat of the summer sun had caused a natural imbalance in these afflicted souls. Their blood had become too hot, too thin. This hot blood, he explained, had flooded their brains, causing a kind of feverish manic state that manifested in this compulsive dancing. To the men in that room, this explanation was a profound relief. It was logical. It was physical. It removed the terrifying specter of God's anger and replaced it with a simple, understandable medical condition. If it was a problem of the body, then it could be solved by the wisdom of men. Their city was not cursed, it was merely sick. They were not sinners being punished. They were patients in need of a cure. It was a diagnosis that was perfectly logical, entirely reasonable within the framework of their knowledge, and catastrophically, tragically wrong. But in that moment, it gave them what they needed most. Sense of control and a clear path forward. A path that would, with the best of intentions, turn a strange affliction into a full-blown disaster. Let's hold two pictures in our minds at once. In the first picture, see the dancers. See their faces, pale and gaunt, slick with sweat. See their lips, cracked and dry from dehydration. See their feet, wrapped in rags that are now soaked through with blood. See the agony in every twitch, every uncontrolled jerk of their limbs. They are prisoners in their own bodies, begging for the stillness of death. Now, in the second picture, see the city council, leaning back in their heavy oak chairs. A sense of relief fills the room. They have a diagnosis, a logical, scientific, natural cause, and if there is a cause, there must be a cure. And the cure, they decided, was as logical as the diagnosis. If the disease was caused by an excess of hot blood that forced the body into a frenzy, then the only way to cure it was to let that frenzy run its course. The dancers, they concluded, must dance themselves well. They must burn out the fever. They must exhaust the affliction. The prescription for an uncontrollable, exhausting dancing was more dancing. It was a public health initiative born from a profound misunderstanding of the human body and soul. They looked at a fire and decided that the best way to put it out was to add more wood. And so, with the full authority of the city guilds and the church, the order was given. This was no longer to be seen as a curse or a chaotic affliction. It was now a prescribed therapy. These poor suffering souls were not to be restrained or pitied. They were to be encouraged, aided. They would be given space and music and a stage upon which to perform their bizarre, agonizing cure. The city of Strasbourg, with the best of intentions, was about to organize a dance marathon for a plague. And so the work began. The city of Strasbourg, known for its efficiency and order, now applied that same diligence to organizing the chaos. The great guild halls were the first to be commandeered. The hall of the tanners, which usually smelled of leather and wax. The hall of the butchers, its great wooden tables usually stained with the work of the day. They were all to be cleared. Imagine the scene. Apprentices and city workers, their faces a mixture of confusion and obedience, pushing the heavy oak tables and benches against the walls. They roll up the fine tapestries that depict the proud history of their guilds. They sweep the floors, clean, creating vast empty wooden spaces. They are preparing a dance floor. They work in a strange, heavy silence, the air thick with the absurdity of their task. They are not preparing for a wedding feast or a holiday celebration. They are preparing for a plague. They are setting the stage for a performance of mass hysteria. The halls, once symbols of civic pride and commerce, now stand empty and waiting. Their polished floors, which had felt the tread of serious merchants and master craftsmen, would soon feel the desperate, bloody shuffling of the dancing sick. The city was building its own infirmaries of madness. The guild halls were not enough. The fever was not contained to the indoors. More and more people were joining the dance in the open streets, in the squares under the hot sun. And so the city leaders, in their strange wisdom, decided to escalate their efforts. If the cure was to be a public one, they reasoned, then it should be done in the most public of places. They chose the horse market, a large open square at the heart of the city. And so another order was given. The city's carpenters were summoned. Imagine them, these sturdy, practical men, their hands used to building houses and mending carts. Now they were tasked with building a stage. They worked with their usual efficiency, their hammers and saws echoing through the square. They laid down thick wooden planks, building a large raised platform. They built it strong, to withstand the weight of many bodies. They were building a stage for a plague, a theatre for a tragedy. There was a profound, terrible irony in their work. With every nail they hammered, with every plank they laid, they were building a monument to their own misunderstanding. They were taking this raw private suffering, this deeply personal torment, and turning it into a public performance. They believed they were helping. They believed they were providing a controlled, structured environment for healing. But what they were really doing was giving the madness a centerpiece, a focal point, a grand stage upon which the city's deepest anxieties could play out for all to see. When they were finished, the stage stood there in the center of the square, empty, waiting. A silent wooden testament to a city trying to solve an unknowable mystery with the only tools it had, wood and nails and a desperate, misguided logic. But a stage is not complete without its performers and its music. A stage needs a soundtrack, and so, following their strange and terrible logic, the guild masters and magistrates of Strasbourg sent out another decree. They hired musicians. They were not minstrels playing gentle ballads of courtly love. They were pipe and tabor players, musicians for festivals and raucous celebrations, chosen for their ability to produce a loud, driving beat. They set up near the newly built stage, their faces a mixture of professional duty and profound confusion. They were paid to play, and so they played, and a new sound filled the air of the city. It was not a joyful sound. It was a relentless, hypnotic rhythm, a heavy, monotonous drumbeat. Boom, tuck, boom, tuck, over and over, a sound designed to command the feet, not to lift the spirit. Above this beat, the shrill, almost manic melody of pipes and shawms sliced through the air. It was a tune that looped endlessly, a maddening spiral of notes with no beginning and no end. This was the music of the plague. It echoed off the stone walls of the cathedral. It bounced down the narrow alleys. It seeped through closed shutters. There was no escaping it. It became the new anxious heartbeat of Strasbourg. For the dancers, the music was not a comfort. It was a cage. Their chaotic individual movements now found a rhythm to lock onto. It did not soothe them, it fueled them. The relentless beat seemed to bypass their weary minds and speak directly to their afflicted limbs, forcing them onward, pushing them past the point of exhaustion and into a deeper state of delirious agony. The city leaders watched, and perhaps they nodded in grim satisfaction. They saw order emerging from the chaos. They saw the dancers moving more or less in time with the music. They believed their therapy was working. They had hoped the music would be a medicine, a gentle hand to guide the dancers back to health. Instead, it became a whip, lashing their tired bodies, forbidding rest, and turning a strange, localized affliction into an organized, citywide spectacle of suffering. The therapy, the city leaders decided, needed to be more structured. The sufferers needed a good example to follow. And so, in a move that shows just how desperate and detached from reality they had become, they made another hire. They hired strong, healthy, professional dancers. Let's picture the scene on that great wooden stage in the horse market. It is one of the most surreal tableaus in all of medieval history. On one side you have the afflicted, dozens of citizens of Strasbourg, their bodies racked with spasms, their eyes glazed over. Their movements are jagged, uncontrolled, born of agony and exhaustion. They are not performing, they are enduring. And on the other side of the stage are the professionals, healthy men and women paid by the city. Their bodies are strong, their movements are precise and full of life. They leap and twirl with practiced grace. They smile encouragingly at the sick, trying to lead them in a proper, energetic dance. They are a picture of health and vitality. Here a sick woman stumbles, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Beside her, a hired dancer executes a perfect, joyful spin. Here a man's legs give out from under him, only for the compulsion to force him back up. Beside him, a professional claps a steady, cheerful rhythm. It is a dance of life next to a dance of death, performed on the same stage, to the same relentless music. The hope was that the healthy energy of the professionals would be contagious, that their joyful example would somehow lift the sufferers out of their dark trance. But the opposite happened. The manic energy of the professionals only seemed to agitate the sick further. The spectacle drew even larger crowds, and the hypnotic, festival-like atmosphere proved to be a fertile ground for the plague to spread. The city's cure was not just ineffective, it was fuel. It was turning a mysterious illness into a city-wide catastrophe. The city's plan did not just fail, it backfired spectacularly. The grand stage, the relentless music, the spectacle of it all, it didn't cure the affliction, it legitimized it. It created an atmosphere so charged with manic energy and hypnotic rhythm that it became irresistible to minds already weakened by fear and hardship. The numbers exploded. What began with one woman, then 34, now swelled with each passing day. By the time the month of July bled into a sweltering August, the dancing plague had consumed the city. Historical accounts vary, as they often do, but they all speak of a staggering number. At its peak, there were as many as 400 people dancing in the streets of Strasbourg. 400. Let that number settle. In a city of this size, it was a catastrophe. The normal life of the city ceased to exist. The streets were no longer for commerce or travel. They were theaters of madness. The air was thick with the sound of music from a dozen different bands, the stamp and shuffle of hundreds of pairs of feet, and the cries of the exhausted. The city's well-intentioned cure had turned into a self-inflicted wound. The rational medical approach had failed, and in the face of such a colossal, inexplicable disaster, the people of Strasbourg turned their eyes away from their doctors and their magistrates, and towards heaven, searching for a divine reason for their earthly hell. When reason fails, faith and fear take its place. Having exhausted the wisdom of their physicians, the people of Strasbourg turned to the stories of their saints, and one name whispered in the darkness began to take hold: Vitus, Saint Vitus. The legend was an old one, brought by travelers from the south. Saint Vitus was a young Sicilian martyr, a boy who, in life, had performed miracles. But in death, his power was said to have a darker side. It was believed that anyone who showed him disrespect, who made merry or danced on his feast day, would be punished. And the punishment was a terrible, poetic irony. He would curse them with an uncontrollable, convulsive dance that would lead to madness and exhaustion. For centuries, this was just a story, a cautionary tale told to children. But now, watching their neighbors flail and twitch in the streets, the old story no longer felt like a legend. It felt like a diagnosis. This was it. This had to be the answer. The affliction was not hot blood. It was the Saint Vitus's dance. The name itself brought a strange, cold comfort. To name a fear is to have a small measure of power over it. It was no longer a random, inexplicable horror. It was a divine punishment, a curse. And if it was a curse, then the city must have sinned. The whispers now turned to a frantic, collective, soul-searching. What had they done to anger the saint? Was it the new fashions the women were wearing? The greed of the merchants? Had someone forgotten to observe a holy day? The fear was now focused. The strange physical malady had become a spiritual crisis. And if the problem was spiritual, then the cure, they reasoned, must also be spiritual. The path forward was no longer through medicine, but through penance, prayer, and pilgrimage. The city had found its explanation, and in doing so, had set the stage for its next and most desperate. Act 1, let's return to the great stage in the horse market. The city's cure is now in full terrible swing, and the scene is something out of a fever dream. This is the carnival of exhaustion. Close your eyes and listen. The air, thick with the August heat, is a wall of sound. It is not just one band, but several, their competing frantic melodies clashing into a chaotic, maddening cacophony. Underneath it all is the sound of the dancers themselves, a constant, thunderous shuffling and stamping of hundreds of pairs of feet, punctuated by involuntary cries, by sobs of exhaustion, by the painful gasps of lungs desperate for air. Now imagine the smell, the sharp, sour smell of stale sweat from hundreds of unwashed bodies, a smell so thick you can almost taste it. It mingles with the dust kicked up from the square, the smell of spilled ale from the gawking crowds, and the faint metallic scent of blood and the sight. The sight is the most terrible of all. The stage and the square around it are a writhing sea of humanity. 400 people locked in their own private torment, yet forced to perform it together. Their movements are no longer dances, they are seizures. Their arms flail, their heads snap back, their eyes are wide and staring but seeing nothing. Foam gathers at the corners of their mouths. They stumble into one another, fall to the hard ground, only to be pulled back to their feet by the same invisible puppeteer, or trampled by the unseeing dancers around them. This was the city's therapy, a public theatre of pain. The sun beats down mercilessly. The music never stops. The dancing never stops. The people of Strasbourg and their leaders could now only watch in horror at the monster they had so carefully, so logically, and so disastrously created. They had tried to organize the madness, and in doing so had only made it louder, larger, and infinitely more deadly. Let's look closer, past the flailing arms and the vacant eyes. Let's look down at the story being told on the ground. The story is written in leather and sweat and blood. Their shoes, the sturdy leather shoes they wore for walking to market or to church, are now destroyed. They are shredded, worn through, little more than pathetic rags tied to their feet. For many, the shoes are gone completely, kicked off in the frenzy days ago. They are dancing on raw flesh. Their feet are swollen to twice their normal size, bruised a terrible shade of purple and black. The cobblestones, hot from the August sun, have blistered and burned their soles. With every stomp, every frantic shuffle, skin tears away, leaving bloody footprints on the stage and the square. This is the terrible engine of the dance. The pain is excruciating, a fire in their feet that screams for them to stop, to fall, to rest. But the compulsion is stronger. They are forced to dance upon their own wounds, to drive the pain deeper with every single involuntary step. It is a form of torment so perfect, so complete, that it is difficult to comprehend. And for some, the body, this poor, brutalized machine, would soon reach its breaking point. The human body is a miracle of endurance, but it is not infinite. It has its limits. And in the great public square of Strasbourg, under the relentless August sun, those limits were being reached. The music pounds, the feet stomp, the bodies twist, and then, in the middle of the frantic crowd on the stage, a man's heart simply gives up. He does not cry out, he does not stumble, he collapses. One moment he is a marionette in the grip of the fever, the next his strings are cut. He falls to the wooden planks with a heavy final thud. For a single breathless moment the music falters. The drummer misses a beat. The piper's shrill note dies in his throat, and a wave of unnatural silence spreads out from the body on the fuel stage. That silence, that brief hollow pause in the madness, was more terrifying than all the noise that came before it. In the noise there was chaos, a spectacle, but in the silence there was truth, there was consequence. A woman in the crowd screams. The spell is broken. The horrible reality of the situation crashes down upon them all. This is not a cure. This is a death sentence performed in public, set to music. The man on the stage was not the only one to fall that day. He was just the first. The first death was a crack in the dam, and in the days that followed, the dam broke. The numbers are difficult to verify, buried as they are in the panicked records of a terrified city. But the accounts that survive all paint the same grim picture. At the plague's peak, during the hottest weeks of that dreadful summer, the city of Strasbourg was losing as many as 15 people every single day. They were dying from strokes, their bodies pushed far beyond any natural limit. They were dying from heart attacks, their hearts simply giving out from the strain. And most of them were dying from simple, brutal exhaustion, their life force completely spent by the relentless, unending motion. The dead would be carried from the stage, their limp bodies a stark contrast to the convulsive energy that had consumed them just moments before, and the dance would continue around the empty space they left behind. The compulsion was stronger than the fear of death itself. For the city leaders, this was the ultimate horror. Their cure was the poison. Their organized, logical, medical intervention was killing the very people it was meant to save. I imagine their helplessness, sitting in their great halls, receiving the daily tally of the dead, knowing that their own decisions had contributed to the toll. The city was no longer just a theater of madness. It had become a public morgue, where the funerals were accompanied by the frantic, inescapable music of the plague. The attempt to control the chaos had failed. The wisdom of man had failed. And the dance went on. Let's be fair for a moment to those long-dead physicians and magistrates. They were not cruel men, they were not foolish, they were simply wrong. They were men of their time, armed with a knowledge that seemed to them to be the pinnacle of reason. They looked upon the dancing plague and saw a disease of the body. They diagnosed it as a natural imbalance, a fever of the blood. It was a perfectly rational conclusion, based on the medical science they had inherited from the great thinkers of Greece and Rome. Their logic was sound. Their premises, however, were flawed. From our vantage point in the distant future, we can see the great gaping hole in their understanding. They failed to consider that the source of the affliction might not be in the blood at all, but in the mind. They had no name for mass hysteria, no concept of a psychological contagion where fear and stress in a community could manifest as a bizarre physical symptom. They did not understand that the human soul, when pushed to its absolute limit by famine, disease, and poverty, could break in ways that would make the body dance against its will. They were trying to heal a wound of the spirit with a remedy for their flesh, and so their cure became a killer. Each body that was carried away from the stage was another piece of evidence against their theory. Each death was a silent testament to the failure of their logic. Eventually, the truth became undeniable, even for the proudest of the city's leaders. The theory of hot blood was wrong. The music was not a medicine. The dancing was not a cure. Their science had failed them. And in the face of that failure, a much older, much more terrifying explanation came roaring back to fill the void. Let's return one last time to that dark, wood-paneled room where the city council meets. The atmosphere of confident, rational debate is gone. It has been replaced by a thick, suffocating silence, heavy with the weight of their failure. Let's listen again to the thoughts of our counsellor Albrecht. But his thoughts are different now. Reason has fled. Only fear remains. 15 souls today, and the sun is not yet set. Their faces, they will haunt my sleep for the rest of my days, if I am granted any more days. The physician is gone. His books and his theories of hot blood are meaningless, now just dust and empty words. He spoke with such certainty, and we, in our pride, we listened, we built the stage. We hired the musicians, we fed the fire, and now our city is an inferno of madness. What have we done? The bishop looks at me from across the table. His eyes are not filled with fear. They are filled with a terrible certainty. He believes he knows the cause. He sees the hand of God in this, a punishment. But for what sin? My mind races, searching for our city's crime. Was it the new tax on the weavers? We were told it was unjust. Was it the argument we had with the neighboring principality over river rights? Or was it something smaller? The vanity of our wives? The gambling in the taverns? The quiet heresies whispered after dark? We are all sinners. Any one of us. Any one of our small secret prides could have brought this curse upon us all. We thought we were in control. We, the men of commerce and law. We thought we were the masters of this city, but we are nothing. Our gold cannot buy a cure. Our laws cannot command the feet to be still. Our authority is a joke in the face of this holy terror. The whispers about Saint Vitus. They are no longer whispers. They are the only explanation left. We have angered him. We have been found wanting in the eyes of heaven. The rational cure has failed. Now we must try the cure of the soul. We must repent. We must pray. There is no other path. A new decree goes out, a retraction of the old one. The therapy of music, the cure of motion, is to cease immediately. A herald walks to the great wooden stage, his face grim. He raises a hand. The musicians, their fingers raw and their lips split from days of endless playing, see the signal. The drummer is the first to stop. His arms heavy as lead let the drumsticks fall, and the relentless pounding heartbeat of the plague goes silent. The piper lowers his instrument, his own breath coming in ragged gasps. One by one, the musicians stop, a wave of profound, weary relief washing over their faces. For the first time in weeks, the city square is quiet. But the dancers do not stop. In the eerie, vast silence, their affliction is laid bare in its purest form. It was never about the music. The compulsion came from within. They continue their frantic, silent ballet, their movements made even more grotesque by the lack of a soundtrack. The only sound now is the heartbreaking scuff and slap of their bloody feet on the dusty planks. The carpenters are summoned again. The same men who built the stage are now ordered to tear it down. They work with a somber efficiency, the sound of their hammers now prying boards loose, dismantling the monument to their city's failed logic. The music has stopped. The stage has been torn down, but the silence that follows is not a peaceful one. It is a heavy, suffocating silence, filled with the sounds that the music had once drowned out. Now you can hear the city's true soundtrack. You can hear the dry, rhythmic rasp of hundreds of pairs of feet, still shuffling, still stamping on the cobblestones. The sound is more intimate now, more terrible without the distraction of a melody. You can hear the low moans of the dancers, sounds of pure physical misery that escape their lips without their consent. You can hear the quiet weeping of family members who stand watching from their doorways, helpless witnesses to the slow-motion destruction of their loved ones. You can hear the murmur of prayers from every open church door, the desperate chanted litanies of a city on its knees. This is Strasbourg now, a city that has exhausted its logic, exhausted its authority, and is now simply exhausted. The manic energy of the past weeks has burned itself out, leaving behind the cold ashes of grief and fear. People stay indoors. The market square is nearly empty, save for the twitching bodies that still occupy it. The normal pulse of life has flatlined, replaced by a shared city-wide state of shock and mourning. They had faced an enemy they could not see, and they had lost. They had tried to fight it with reason and music and civic order, and they had failed. Now, there was nothing left to do but endure. They were a city brought low, waiting in the dreadful quiet for a new plan, a new hope, or for the end, whatever it might be. The air was thick with the bitter taste of failure, and the dance went on. Weeks earlier, the men who ran Strasbourg had gathered in their halls as men of reason. They listened to their physician, nodded at his scientific-sounding theories, and felt the confident pride of men who believed they could solve any problem with logic and order. They saw themselves as doctors treating a patient. Now those same men gathered not in their council chambers, but on their knees, on the cold stone floor of the great cathedral. Their pride was gone, shattered by the daily tally of the dead. Their confidence had evaporated, replaced by a deep and humbling fear. They were no longer doctors, they were sinners, and so the city made its formal confession. The bells of the cathedral, which had once called citizens to their daily work, now called them to prayer and penance. From the pulpit, the bishop, his voice trembling with a mixture of piety and terror, declared that the dancing plague was a manifestation of God's righteous anger. The city, he declared, had sinned. They had been too vain, too greedy, too worldly. And St. Vitus, the holy martyr, had been sent as a scourge to punish them, to remind them of their own frailty. It was a stunning reversal. The rational medical approach was officially abandoned. The city, as one, embraced the supernatural explanation they had once dismissed. In a strange way, this public confession was a relief. It is perhaps easier to believe that you are being punished for a specific sin than to accept that you are a victim of a random, meaningless chaos. A sin can be atoned for. A prayer can be offered. A punishment has a beginning, and, one hopes, an end. The city had found a new diagnosis and, with it, a new desperate path towards a cure. The city had confessed its sin. Now it had to seek its salvation. And in their desperate search for a cure, the leaders and priests of Strasbourg seized upon the story that was already on everyone's lips. The story of St. Vitus. If the saint had cursed them, they reasoned, then only the saint could lift the curse. And so a new plan was forged, a plan born not of medicine, but of pilgrimage. They would take the afflicted, the dancers who were still strong enough to walk and lead, them on a journey, They would leave the city and travel to a mountaintop shrine, a place sacred to the very saint they believed was tormenting them. There they would make offerings, they would pray for forgiveness, they would beg the spirit of St. Vitus to have mercy to calm the fever in their limbs and to grant them peace. It was a strange paradoxical logic. To seek a cure from the source of the disease, to ask for comfort from the very hand that dealt the punishment. But for the people of 1518, it made perfect sense. It was an act of profound submission. They were admitting their own powerlessness and placing their fate entirely in the hands of the divine. They were no longer trying to fight the curse, they were trying to appease it, and so this pilgrimage became the city's last desperate hope. The entire community poured its collective faith into this single solemn journey. It was a final gamble, a last-ditch effort to find a miracle when all earthly wisdom had failed. Preparations began at once for this strange and sorrowful procession. The dancers were to be gathered, and they were to be given special attire for their sacred journey. I was new. My leather was strong, my stitches were tight, and my color was a deep, vibrant red. The color of wine, of poppies, of a healthy, beating heart. I was made for a celebration, for a joyful dance at a wedding or a festival. I sat in the cobbler's shop, waiting for a happy purpose. But my destiny was not a happy one. I was taken to the town square. And there I was placed into the hands of a weeping man who knelt before one of the dancers. The foot that entered me was not a dancer's foot. It was a swollen, bruised, and broken thing. It was a testament to weeks of agony. I, in my new red brightness, was a stark contrast to the suffering I was now bound to. My purpose was not to celebrate, but to be a part of a desperate prayer. Red, the color of the blood of martyrs, was meant to be a symbol of piety, an offering to the angry saint. And with the first lurching involuntary step of the woman who wore me, my new leather was scuffed on the hard stone. My brilliant red was stained with the dust and the blood of the square. I was no longer a shoe for a festival. I was now a part of the plague, a witness, strapped to the very feet of the affliction. And my journey, a sorrowful pilgrimage, was just beginning. And so the great sorrowful procession began. It was not a pilgrimage of hope and joyful faith. It was a forced march of the afflicted. The remaining dancers, hundreds of them, were herded out of the city gates like a flock of sick sheep. Those who could still stand stumbled forward on their swollen, bleeding feet, now clad in those strange, new red shoes. Their bodies still twitched and jerked to the silent internal rhythm of their disease. Those who were too weak to walk on their own were half carried, half dragged by their desperate family members or by strong men hired by the city for this grim task. Imagine the horror of it. Trying to support the dead weight of a loved one whose limbs are still flailing, still fighting against you. Compelled to dance even as they are collapsing. Priests walked among them, holding crucifixes high, their voices a low, monotonous chant of Latin prayers, the smoke from their censers mingling with the dust from the road. They were leading this wretched parade out of the city, up into the hills, towards a small wooden shrine dedicated to St. Vitus. The journey was an agony. The summer sun beat down on them. The rocky path was steep and unforgiving. With every step a new wave of pain. With every mile another dancer would fall, their body and spirit finally broken. This was the city's last, desperate gamble. They were physically removing the problem, sending it away into the mountains in the hope that a miracle might occur, that the fresh mountain air, or the proximity to the holy shrine, or simply the grace of the offended saint, would finally grant them peace. It was a slow, agonizing procession, a river of human suffering flowing out of the city and up the mountainside. And at its head, leading the way, was the heartbreaking, relentless scuff and stamp of those bright red shoes. They arrive at the shrine, a wretched collection of exhausted souls. It is not a grand cathedral. It is a small, simple chapel made of dark, weathered wood, perched high in the mountains where the wind never stops whispering through the pines. Inside it is dark and cool, the air thick with the smell of old incense and the damp chill of stone. At the center of it all is a statue of the saint himself, a simple figure, carved from wood and painted in faded colors. His expression is serene, unreadable. His wooden eyes seem to stare down at the afflicted with an ancient, silent judgment. One by one, the dancers are brought before him. Their frantic movements have slowed to a painful, exhausted shuffle. Their heads hang low. They are puppets with their energy all but spent. The priests begin to chant their Latin prayers echoing in the small stone-walled space. They sprinkle the dancers with holy water. Family members fall to their knees, their own faces wet with tears, making desperate vows to the silent wooden figure. They promise charity, they promise piety, they promise anything. If only the saint will show mercy and command the dance to end. Small offerings are placed at the statue's feet. A piece of bread, a small bent coin, a single red shoe removed. From a bleeding foot, left as a symbol of their suffering and their hope. There is no sudden miracle. No divine light fills the chapel. No one is instantly cured. There is only the low sound of prayer, the shuffling of tired red shoes on the stone floor, and the heavy, desperate hope of a people who have placed their entire world at the feet of a silent saint. They waited. For a day and then a night, they kept their vigil at the mountain shrine, praying as the afflicted continued their sorrowful, exhausted dance. At first, nothing changed. Hope began to curdle into a final, deep despair. And then, a small miracle. Woman, one of the first to join Frau Trophia weeks ago, stumbled and fell to the stone floor. This had happened many times before, but this time was different. This time she did not get back up. Her body lay still, trembling with the aftershocks of her long ordeal, but her feet were at peace. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. No one dared to move or speak, as if a single sound might break the fragile spell. Later that day, another man, leaning against a wooden pillar, slowly slid to the ground, his legs finally ceasing their frantic motion. The next morning, a handful more found their rest. It was not a sudden, dramatic healing. It was a slow, reluctant release. It was as if the fever, having burned so brightly and so terribly, was now slowly running out of fuel, letting go of its victims one by one. Was it a miracle? Did the spirit of Saint Vitus, his anger soothed by their offerings and their penance, finally grant them mercy? That is what the people of Strasbourg chose to believe. They saw it as the answer to their prayers, a testament to their faith. Or was it something more mundane? Had the plague simply run its natural course? Had the change of scenery, the cool mountain air, and the sheer, bone-deep exhaustion finally broken the psychological spell? We in our modern world will never know for sure. But for the people at that shrine watching their loved ones finally find stillness, it was an answer. It was the end of the nightmare. It was grace. The people of 1518 had their miracle. They had their story of an angered saint and a city's repentance. It was a story that gave meaning to their suffering and brought them comfort. But we, looking back across the gulf of 500 years, with our modern understanding of science and the human mind, we have a different story to tell. Today, the most widely accepted explanation for the dancing plague is not a curse, but a tragic and fascinating psychological phenomenon. We call it mass psychogenic illness, or more simply, mass hysteria. It wasn't a poison in the water or a physical disease. It was a sickness of the mind that became a sickness of the body. And Strasbourg in 1518 was the perfect breeding ground for such an affliction. Imagine a perfect storm of misery. The first ingredient was hardship. The years leading up to 1518 had been brutal. There were famines, viciously cold winters. The price of grain was impossibly high. The people were starving, malnourished, and living under a constant, grinding stress. The second ingredient was disease. The region was ravaged by illnesses we can barely imagine today. Leprosy, smallpox, the sweating sickness. Death was not a distant concept, it was a constant, familiar neighbor. And the third, most potent ingredient was fear. This was a deeply superstitious age. The people believed wholeheartedly in a world populated by demons, spirits, and saints who could interfere directly in their lives. They saw divine judgment in every flood, every failed crop, every sick child. Their minds were a tinderbox of stress, grief, and fear, just waiting for a spark. And Frau Trophäa, she was that spark. Her very public, very bizarre breakdown provided a template. For others in the community, whose own minds were at their breaking point, their suffering found a strange, subconscious outlet. They saw her dance, and their own anxieties latched onto that behavior. It was a contagion of suggestion, a shared, public, nervous breakdown where the unbearable stress inside finally found a way to express itself through the exhausted, flailing limbs of the dance. The story of a psychological storm is a powerful one, but there is another theory, favored by some historians, that points to a more tangible culprit. A physical poison, hiding in plain sight in the people's daily bread. This theory centers on a fungus called ergot. It is a dark, purplish-black growth that can infest stalks of rye, especially after a damp spring is followed by a hot summer. Exactly the weather conditions Strasbourg experienced in the years leading up to 1518. Rye was the staple grain of the poor, and in times of famine, people would harvest and mill every last grain, even those that looked diseased. And this fungus, ergot, it contains a powerful psychoactive chemical. It is, in fact, the natural substance from which LSD was first synthesized. When ingested, ergot can cause a condition once known as St. Anthony's fire. The symptoms are a terrifying match for the dancing plague. It can cause vivid, frightening hallucinations. It can cause a painful burning sensation in the limbs, and most importantly, it can cause severe, uncontrollable muscle spasms and convulsions. So, perhaps what the chroniclers described as a dance was not a dance at all. Perhaps it was a series of violent convulsive seizures brought on by a poison that was unknowingly baked into every loaf of bread they ate. The hallucinations could explain their terror, their visions of saints and demons, and the uncontrollable. Spasms would look to an outside observer exactly like a frantic, endless dance. It seems like a perfect fit. A neat scientific explanation for a bizarre historical mystery. It suggests the cause was not in their minds, but in their food. A physical poison leading to a physical reaction. It seems so neat, doesn't it? A choice between a sickness of the mind or a poison in the bread. And for many, the story of ergot poisoning feels like the final, definitive answer. But when we look closer, this story too begins to fray at the edges. If it was ergotism, why did the victims only dance? This affliction, known as St. Anthony's fire, often caused other more gruesome symptoms like gangrene, where the limbs would blacken and die. Yet no historical account from Strasbourg mentions this. And if a large batch of rye flour was contaminated, why didn't it affect everyone in a household? Why didn't it cause a single, massive outbreak? Instead, the plague spread slowly, over weeks, as if passed from person to person. A poison doesn't behave that way, so then we are left with mass hysteria, a psychological storm. This theory explains the contagion, the way fear could leap from one mind to another. But it too has its own difficult questions. Can the mind on its own truly force the body to dance for days on end? To dance until the heart gives out, until the feet are worn to bone and sinew? The sheer physical endurance of the dancers seems almost superhuman, beyond what a purely psychological condition should be able to produce. Can the mind truly dance the body to death on such a scale? The truth is, we don't know, and perhaps we never will. Each theory explains one part of the mystery perfectly, but fails to explain the other. It's a puzzle with a missing piece. Perhaps the truth is a combination of all three. A people weakened by famine and poisoned by tainted bread, whose terrified, superstitious minds took those physical symptoms and wove them into a frantic, deadly dance. In the end, we are left where the people of Strasbourg were, watching something we cannot fully comprehend. A strange and terrible ghost that danced its way through a city one summer and then vanished. And amidst all of these theories, all of these grand explanations of science and spirit, it is easy to forget where this story began. It did not begin with a theory. It began with a woman, Frau Trophäa, the woman who stepped out of her ordinary life and into the pages of history, not through an act of will, but through the treason of her own body. She was the first spark that lit the great fire. And here lies the final, most intimate mystery of the dancing plague. The historical records which so carefully noted her name and the start of her strange ordeal are utterly silent on how her story ends. Did she survive the long pilgrimage to the mountain shrine? Was she one of the first to die of exhaustion on that crowded stage, or one of the last to find peace? Or did she, after her body was finally still, simply melt back into the quiet, anonymous life she had known before? We don't know. She vanishes from the record as mysteriously as she appeared. She is a question mark at the beginning of the story and a question mark at the end, a quiet ghost whose silent, frantic dance haunts us still. And then September came. The oppressive, suffocating heat of August finally broke. A cool wind began to blow down from the mountains, carrying with it the crisp, earthy smell of autumn. The leaves on the trees along the river began to turn from green to gold. The great slow wheel of the seasons had turned once more. And as the world changed, so did the plague. As if the fever was tied to the summer heat itself, the last of the dancers began to falter. The frantic energy that had possessed them for so long finally seemed to burn itself out. By the middle of the month, the last shuffling, twitching dancer collapsed onto the cobblestones, their body finally, blessedly still. And for the first time in nearly 2 months, the city of Strasbourg was completely silent of the dance. Slowly, cautiously, the city began to breathe again. A window opened, then another. The sound of a blacksmith's hammer, a sound that had been absent for weeks, tentatively rang out. The merchants began to set up their stalls in the market square again, their voices low and sombre, not yet ready for the boisterous haggling of before. Life crept back into the city, but it was a different kind of life. A quieter life. A life with a scar. Everyone had seen things they wished they could forget. Everyone had lost a neighbor, a friend, a family member, either to the plague itself or to the fear it had spawned. The city had survived, but it was humbled. It had looked into a deep, strange mirror and had seen a reflection of itself it did not understand. And the memory of that reflection would linger long after the last red shoe had been swept from the streets. But what of the dancers themselves? What was it like for the survivors when the invisible puppeteer finally let go of the strings? Let's imagine being one of them. Let's call her Greta. For weeks, her body has been a prison, her limbs traitors to her will. And then, one afternoon at the shrine of St. Vitus, it simply stops. The first sensation is not relief, it is shock. The sheer, profound and terrifying shock of stillness. For so long, movement has been the only reality. The silence in my muscles feels louder than all the music that came before. I collapse to the cool stone floor, not with a dancer's grace, but like a sack of grain, a heavy, boneless weight, and I lie there just breathing, in and out. It is the first thing I have controlled in a month. It is a miracle. Then, the second sensation arrives, pain. Now that the manic energy is gone, the body begins to send its long overdue reports. The fire in my feet, which are now just a pulp of raw flesh and bruised bone. The deep, agonizing ache in my legs, my back, my shoulders. A pain so complete, it feels as if my very marrow is tired. A thirst so profound, it feels like my throat is made of dust. And a hunger that gnaws at my empty stomach. My family rushes to me. Their faces are a blur of tears and relief. They lift me, and I am as limp as a newborn. They give me water, and it is the sweetest thing I have ever tasted. They carry me home. They wash the grime and the dried blood from my body, and as they do, I look at my own limbs as if they belong to a stranger. I have no clear memory of the past weeks. It is a fever dream, a whirlwind of blurred faces, of endless pounding noise, of a constant, driving need to move. Did I do that? Was that me? The shame is a quiet, heavy stone, but the exhaustion is heavier. They lay me in my own bed, on my own straw mattress, and for the first time in what feels like a lifetime, I close my eyes. And the world, the dancing, screaming, agonizing world, finally goes away. The bodies heal. The city returns to its routine. The grass grows again in the cracks between the cobblestones where blood was shed. But a question hangs in the cool autumn air, a question that has never truly gone away. What was it? What truly happened in the streets of Strasbourg in the summer of 1518? Was it a punishment from an angry saint? A physical poison lurking in their daily bread? Or was it a storm in the collective soul of a people pushed too far? A fever of the mind made real. History is full of mysteries, but few are as strange, as personal, and as deeply unsettling as this one. It is a story that resists any single, easy explanation. It sits at the strange crossroads where medicine, faith, and the human mind all meet. Perhaps the most honest answer is simply, we don't know, and perhaps we never will. The story of the dancing plague remains a ghost, a haunting, unanswered question whispered down through the centuries. Perhaps the right question is not what happened in Strasbourg, but what the event tells us. A story this strange does not come from nowhere. It is a symptom. It is a fevered dream of a sick and frightened age. Let's think about the world these people lived in. It was a world of profound and constant anxiety. For years they had been stalked, by famine, their harvests failing, the threat of starvation a constant gnawing presence. Their bodies were weak, their children malnourished. They lived in the shadow of relentless disease. The Black Death was still a living memory, and other sicknesses swept through their communities with a terrifying regularity. Death was not a peaceful visitor in old age. It was a thief that could strike anyone at any time, and on top of this earthly suffering, there was a deep spiritual terror. They lived in a world where they believed their eternal souls were in constant peril, where the wrath of an angry God could manifest at any moment, in any form. Imagine carrying that weight, the weight of a hungry stomach, a grieving heart, and a terrified soul. Imagine carrying it for years. What happens to a person or to a whole city when the pressure becomes too great to bear? Perhaps the dancing plague was the answer. Perhaps it was the only way their bodies could express a suffering so deep. Their minds had no words for it. It was a collective scream, made of muscle and bone instead of sound. It was the physical manifestation of a society's nervous breakdown. The legacy of the dance, then, is a haunting reminder. A reminder that our communities, like our bodies, have a breaking point. It is a story about what happens when people are left without hope, without security, and without a voice for their pain. Sometimes, when the mind can no longer speak its sorrow, the body begins to dance. The body has its own strange and ancient wisdom. When an infection enters our system, the body creates a fever. It raises its own temperature, enduring a period of discomfort and delirium, all in a desperate attempt to burn out the sickness, to make itself clean again. A fever is not the illness itself. It is the body's violent, painful, and often successful attempt at a cure. Perhaps the dancing plague was a kind of fever, a social fever. The infection was not a bacteria or a virus. The infection was years of famine, of grief, of a deep, gnawing fear that had seeped into the very soul of the community. The pressure had built up, silent and invisible, until the community's spirit could no longer contain it, and so the body took over. Perhaps the dance was a desperate, unconscious attempt to heal, a way to physically burn out the spiritual poison, a convulsive, violent ritual to shake out the demons of anxiety and despair that had taken root in their hearts. It was the body speaking a language the conscious mind could not. It was a scream that lasted for weeks. It was not a curse sent from a saint above. It was a storm that rose from within, an expression of a pain so profound, the only way to release it was to move, to sweat, to flail, to dance until there was nothing left. Until the body and the community it belonged to was either purified or broken. It was a terrible, dangerous, and deeply human form of self-medication. We look back at the people of 1518 from our modern world of science and reason, and we think we are so different. We think we are the masters of our own minds, the calm pilots of our own lives. But are we really? Perhaps we do not dance in the streets until our feet bleed. But do we not have our own invisible music, our own frantic, compulsive rhythms? Think of the endless, anxious dance of ambition, the relentless, striving for more, for better, for a prize we can never quite grasp, or the hypnotic dance of distraction, the endless scrolling through glowing screens, our minds held captive by a river of noise and images, a dance to keep the silence at bay. We too are moved by forces we don't fully understand. We too can be swept up in a collective fever. Be it of fear or outrage or desire. The story of the dancing plague is a profound and humbling reminder of how fragile our own reason can be. It shows us that underneath the thin, polished veneer of civilization and logic, we are still ancient creatures, vulnerable to suggestion, to fear, and to the strange, deep currents of the collective soul. The people of Strasbourg remind us that we are all perhaps just one bad harvest, one great societal stress, one powerful, contagious fear, away from a strange dance of our own. Their story is not just a strange footnote in history, it is a mirror, and in it, if we are honest, we can sometimes see a flicker of our own. Reflection. If you were to visit the city of Strasbourg today, you would find a beautiful, peaceful place. The great cathedral still stands, a masterpiece of Gothic architecture. The half-timbered houses still lean against each other in the narrow, charming streets. Tourists sit at outdoor cafes sipping wine and taking pictures. Children laugh and chase pigeons in the square where the great stage once stood. The city is calm. The city is orderly. The city is at peace. But history has a long memory. The stones themselves remember. And if you stand in that square on a quiet summer evening after the tourists have gone, and you listen very, very closely, you might almost be able to hear it. A faint, ghostly echo on the wind, the sound of a single pair of leather shoes slapping against the cobblestones in a frantic, desperate rhythm. The plague is gone. But the story remains, a strange and haunting whisper in the very heart of this beautiful modern city. That city, Strasbourg, has a beautiful sound today. The murmur of conversation, the laughter of children, the gentle tolling of the cathedral bell. But for a few weeks, in the summer of 1518, it had a different soundtrack, a frantic, terrible music that never ceased. The pounding of drums, the shrill cry of pipes, a melody born of desperation and madness. That music was the engine of the plague. It was the air the dancers breathed. And yet, of all the strange details of this story, perhaps the strangest is this, that music is gone utterly. No one wrote it down. No one preserved the melody, the tune that drove 400 people into a frenzy, the notes that accompanied men and women to their deaths, has vanished completely from the world. We know of it only through written descriptions that call it driving and manic. We know its effect, but we will never know its sound. It has dissolved back into the silence from which it came, and perhaps that is for the best. Perhaps a melody born of such suffering does not deserve to be remembered. It served its terrible purpose, and now it rests in peace along with the tired feet that were forced to dance to its rhythm. All that is left now is the story and the quiet. A deep, profound quiet, perfect for rest, perfect for sleep. So, as our story comes to a close, what do we take with us from this strange summer in Strasbourg? What is the final legacy of the dancing plague? It is, I think, a simple and deeply humbling reminder that we are not always in control. We walk through our modern lives with an illusion of command. We believe we are the masters of our thoughts, the captains of our souls. We make our plans, we set our schedules, we build our logical, orderly worlds, and then a story like this comes whispering down through the centuries to remind us of the thinness of the ice on which we skate. It reminds us that beneath the surface of our reason, there are deep, ancient, and powerful currents. The currents of fear, of grief, of stress, of a faith so strong it can move the body against its will. The people of Strasbourg were not foolish or weak. They were simply human, and they were overwhelmed. Their story shows us what can happen when a community is pushed to its absolute limit, when the body and the soul can no longer bear the weight of their world. Their dance was a strange and terrible one, but perhaps it is a dance we all know in some small way. The dance of an anxious mind that will not be still in the middle of the night. The dance of a heart pulled by a grief it cannot name. The dance of a society swept up in a fever of its own making. The story of 1518 allows us to look back at our ancestors not with judgment but with a profound and gentle empathy. We see their strange ordeal, and in it we recognize our own shared human fragility. Their long, frantic dance is over. They have found their rest. And now, as their story fades into the quiet of the past, it is time for us to find our own. And so, Sami, let us leave the city of Strasbourg to its quiet healing. Let the memory of the frantic music finally fade away. Let the sound of the shrill pipes and the pounding drums dissolve into the mists of the past. There is no beat to follow now. Let the sound of those hundreds of shuffling, stamping feet grow quiet. The frantic rhythm has ceased. The desperate dance is done. They have found their rest. There are no more whispers in the marketplace, no more anxious prayers in the cathedral. There is only the gentle sound of the wind blowing through the empty streets and the quiet alleys. And there is the sound of your own breathing. Just listen to it for a moment. In and out. A slow, steady, peaceful rhythm. A rhythm that you control. A dance that is all your own. Feel the stillness in your arms and legs. A heavy, warm, and welcome stillness. The story is over now. All the frantic energy has dissipated, leaving only this deep, profound calm. You are safe here, you are at peace, and there is nothing left to do but rest. Let the dancers of Strasbourg finally sleep, the deep, dreamless, and peaceful sleep they earned so long ago. Their frantic story has been told, and now it returns to the quiet pages of history. Let the memory of their dance fade from your mind. Let the sound of their feet dissolve into the silence. There is nothing left now but the comfort of your bed and the gentle rhythm of your own quiet breathing. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be. Just here, just now. Floating in this peaceful, quiet moment, feel your thoughts becoming lighter, softer, like clouds drifting across a moonlit sky. And just let them drift away. Let them go. The night is here to hold them for you. It is time to rest. It is time to dream. Let the last whispers of our story become the first whispers of your own dreams. Sleep now. Sleep well. Good night.